Good morning. I wanted to talk through some of the context for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So let's start with the roots of this particular work and the Middle English period in general in medieval England. Two roots. One is classical, one is Christian. We see this early on in the poem. The first thing out of the poet's mouth is something about the fall of Troy, which of course alludes to the subject of the Iliad, Homer's poem, and the fact that the Greeks are able to overcome the Trojans. And then we get the first scene in the poem, which is a Christian scene of Arthur and his men celebrating the birth of Christ. So, what's going on here? Well, first, with classical roots, it's important to know that England, even though it's the Wyoming of Europe, considered itself in direct lineage with Rome, which was the greatest civilization of the medieval period. And so they saw Brutus, who is the great grandson of Aeneas, the founder of Rome, as actually the founder of Britain. The reason Britain has the name Britain is because it came from Brutus. And so there's this classical lineage that we see in the poem, and then there's also this Christian lineage denoted by the fact that Arthur and his men are, at least on the surface, Christian. Now, this is a conflict with one another. We can see that even in the chivalric code that marks the Arthurian knights in its focus on battle and its privileging of romantic relationships. Frankly, the chivalric code is more classical, more pagan than it is Christian. But what several knights did, especially in the Arthur legends, is combine Christianity with those more pagan qualities of respecting your Lord and respecting women. And so one of the things we're going to look at is the way in which Arthur and particularly Gawain combine what look like pagan virtues with Christian virtues. And I think they're at tension in the poem. Let's go a little bit further. Let's talk about Arthur, because there is a contrast between what we know about Arthur historically and what the legend says. In truth, Arthur was probably a Welsh warrior, a native Briton warrior who attempted to fight off the Anglo-Saxons when they attacked Britain in the 5th century. But in legend, he became the greatest British king of all time, a testament to the time when Britain was powerful before it became the victim of all these invasions. And so we have two different stories going on, the reality and the truth. We see this also with Gawain. Gawain is a character that's remarked upon in a lot of different Arthurian legends, and so it's important to distinguish between what the poet says about him in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and what the legend is. Everybody agrees he's the nephew of Arthur. Now, what people don't agree on is his moral standing. In general, Gawain's character becomes known for abiding by the letter of the chivalric code rather than its spirit. He's always known for courtesy, but what differs is whether Gawain is superficially good or actually good. And so we'll talk about that some more. And finally, some historical context. England in 1375 is recovering from the Black Plague, which killed a third of England's occupants. And so one of the reasons we might think about why this poet in 1375 is thinking about a king who lived 800 years before he did is that England's not in a good position in 1375, and the poet may be trying to think through, can we learn some lessons from this period in time, which at least in legend is supposed to be Britain's greatest period? And then if we look at the author, we discover that he's written other poems about moral purity. In fact, the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is found in a volume with 3 other poems called Purity and Cleanness and then uh, Pearl. Three different poems, and this is the one we're going to look at from this particular author.